The June sun shone brilliantly over the Hamptons that Saturday afternoon, casting a golden glow over the sprawling oceanfront estate of the Harrington family. White roses and orchids adorned every surface of the grand tent erected on the manicured lawn, their fragrance mingling with the salt air. The wedding of Daniel Harrington, son of real estate mogul William Harrington, to Sophia Mitchell, daughter of a prominent federal judge, was the social event of the season. Daniel, 32, stood at the altar, his dark hair perfectly styled, his custom Tom Ford tuxedo impeccably fitted. His hands trembled slightly as he waited, watching the entrance where his bride would soon appear. The string quartet played softly, and 300 guests filled the seats, a who's who of New York's elite society. "You okay?" whispered James, Daniel's best man and closest friend since their days at Exeter. "Never better," Daniel replied, though his voice betrayed his nerves. This day had been years in the making. After meeting Sophia during a charity gala 4 years ago, their relationship had blossomed from casual dates to a deep connection that surprised even Daniel himself. The approval of his father, William, a man notoriously difficult to impress, had been the final piece in what seemed to be a perfect picture. William Harrington sat in the front row, his imposing figure commanding respect even at 65. His silver hair and keen eyes reflected the shrewdness that had built Harrington Developments into a billion-dollar empire. Beside him sat Eleanor, his wife of 35 years, elegant in a pale blue Chanel suit, her auburn hair swept into a sophisticated updo. To casual observers, they appeared the perfect power couple, successful, respected, enviable. Only Daniel knew the complex reality beneath the surface. His father's demanding nature, the constant pressure to excel, the conditional affection tied to achievement. Yet today, William had seemed unusually emotional, even pulling Daniel into a rare embrace before the ceremony. "I'm proud of you, son," William had said, his voice gruff. "Sophia is exactly the kind of woman this family needs." Those words had filled Daniel with a warmth he'd spent decades chasing. The music changed, signaling the bride's arrival. Guests rose to their feet as Sophia appeared in a vision of white, her gown a masterpiece of lace and silk. Daniel's breath caught. Despite their years together, her beauty still struck him profoundly. As Judge Mitchell walked his daughter down the aisle, Daniel caught his mother dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Eleanor had always been more emotionally reserved than demonstrative, but today she seemed particularly affected. Daniel attributed it to the significance of the occasion, her only child getting married. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, and finally the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Daniel kissed Sophia, feeling a surge of happiness so pure it nearly overwhelmed him. For once, everything in his life was exactly as it should be. The reception began with champagne and congratulations. Daniel and Sophia moved through the crowd, accepting well wishes, posing for photographs, playing their parts perfectly. The dinner service commenced, followed by speeches. James delivered his best man's toast with the perfect balance of humor and sentiment. Judge Mitchell spoke movingly about welcoming Daniel into their family. Then William Harrington rose to his feet, champagne flute in hand. The tent fell silent in anticipation. William's speeches were renowned in business circles, concise, powerful, often quoted in financial publications. "When Daniel was born," William began, his deep voice carrying across the space, "I held him in my arms and made a promise that I would build a legacy worthy of him. Today, seeing the man he has become, I know that he has built something worthy of that legacy." Murmurs of approval rippled through the audience. William continued, speaking of Daniel's accomplishments, Wharton Business School, his rapid rise through the company ranks, his philanthropic initiatives. Pride was evident in every word. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. This public acknowledgement was something he had craved his entire life. To Daniel and Sophia, William concluded, raising his glass. May your marriage be as successful as your individual achievements. And as William sat down, he placed his hand over Eleanor's in a rare public display of affection. But anyone watching closely would have noticed her subtle withdrawal, the slight stiffening of her shoulders. The evening progressed to the couple's first dance. Daniel held Sophia close as they moved across the floor to, at last, her head resting on his shoulder. From this vantage point, he could see his parents at their table. Something in his mother's expression gave him pause, a tightness around her eyes, a distance in her gaze that seemed at odds with the joyous occasion. "Is everything okay?" Sophia whispered, sensing his distraction. "Perfect," Daniel assured her, pushing the thought away. "Everything is perfect." As tradition dictated, Daniel later danced with Eleanor, while Sophia danced with her father. Eleanor moved gracefully, years of ballroom dance lessons evident in her posture. But Daniel could feel a tension in her that hadn't been there earlier. "Mom, is something wrong?" he asked quietly. "Nothing's wrong, darling," she replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just emotional seeing you so grown up." The dance ended, and Eleanor excused herself to the powder room. Daniel rejoined Sophia, pushing his concerns aside. The cake was cut, more champagne flowed, and the dance floor filled with guests. The celebration was everything they had planned. As the evening progressed, William stood to make an impromptu second speech. This was unusual. William Harrington was known for his precision, not spontaneity. Daniel noticed his father's slightly loosened tie, the extra flush in his cheeks, suggesting he'd indulged in more scotch than usual. "I'd like to propose another toast," William announced, his voice carrying a warmth rarely displayed in public. "To my son, who has never disappointed me, who has carried the Harrington name with dignity and purpose, who has made me prouder than I ever thought possible." Daniel felt a rush of emotion. These were the words he had longed to hear throughout his childhood, through college, through his early career. Public validation from William Harrington was rarer than a flawless diamond. "And to think," William continued, raising his glass higher, "that 32 years ago, I wasn't even sure I wanted children. Eleanor convinced me, and it was the best decision of my life." A strange hush fell over the nearby tables. Daniel saw his mother re-enter the tent, her face suddenly pale as she heard William's words. Something in her expression sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "Thank you, William," the event coordinator said smoothly, attempting to move the program along. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the band will play for another hour before the send-off." The music resumed, but Eleanor remained frozen at the edge of the dance floor, her eyes locked on William. Daniel excused himself from Sophia's side and moved toward his mother, concerned by her obvious distress. Before he could reach her, Eleanor walked purposefully toward William, her movements stiff with barely contained emotion. Guests parted before her, sensing the tension. She reached William and whispered something urgently in his ear. He frowned, shaking his head dismissively. Whatever he said in response caused Eleanor to step back as if struck, her face transformed with an emotion Daniel had never seen on his mother's carefully composed features, raw, unfiltered fury. "Eleanor," William said, his tone warning. "Not now." But something had broken in Eleanor Harrington. 35 years of perfect composure shattered in an instant. She turned toward the crowd, toward Daniel, her voice rising above the music, above the murmurs of conversation. "He's not the father!" The hall went silent. 300 guests froze in tableau, champagne flutes suspended mid-air, conversations halted mid-sentence. The music stumbled to a stop. Daniel stood paralyzed, the words not fully registering. "Not the father. Not the father." The phrase echoed in the sudden silence, bouncing off crystal and china, reverberating through the stunned gathering. William's face drained of color. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you're making a scene." But Eleanor Harrington, who had spent decades as the perfect corporate wife, the flawless hostess, the supportive partner, was beyond caring about scenes. Her eyes sought Daniel's across the room, filled with a lifetime of unspoken truths. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." The silence that followed Eleanor's declaration lasted only seconds, but to Daniel it stretched into an eternity. He stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the words that had just shattered his world. Around him, guests exchanged shocked glances, whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Sophia appeared at his side, her hand slipping into his. "Daniel?" she whispered, concern etched across her features. Before he could respond, William's voice cut through the tension, controlled but edged with cold fury. "I think my wife has had too much champagne. Please, everyone, continue enjoying yourselves." The band, taking their cue, hastily began playing again. But the damage was done. The perfect illusion of the day had cracked irreparably. Eleanor remained standing, her shoulders straight, despite the trembling of her hands. 35 years, William," she said, her voice carrying despite its softness. 35 years of your lies and control. I won't do it anymore." Daniel found himself moving forward, as if in a dream, aware of the hundreds of eyes following his every step. He reached his mother, gently taking her elbow. "Mom," he said quietly, "let's go somewhere private." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time that day. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I never meant for you to find out this way." William moved toward them, his expression thunderous. "Eleanor, that's enough." "No, William," she replied, a new strength in her voice. "It's not nearly enough." Daniel felt as though he were watching the scene from outside his body. His parents, were they even both his parents, stood facing each other like combatants, 35 years of marriage crumbling between them. James appeared at Daniel's side. "I've arranged for a room in the house," he said quietly. "Away from everyone." Nodding gratefully, Daniel guided his mother toward the main house, aware of William following behind them. Sophia started to come along, but Daniel shook his head slightly. "Please," he whispered, "make our excuses. I need to handle this." Hurt flashed across her face, but she nodded. "I'll take care of things here." The walk to the house seemed to take hours. Inside, James led them to William's study, a wood-paneled sanctuary that had always been off-limits to Daniel as a child. The irony wasn't lost on him. When the door closed behind them, leaving just the three Harringtons in the room, Daniel turned to face his mother. "What did you mean?" he asked, his voice steadier than he expected. "What did you mean, he's not my father?" Eleanor sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly looking older than her 60 years. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. "Everything I've done has been to protect you." "By lying to me my entire life?" Daniel couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "By giving you the Harrington name," William interjected coldly. "By raising you as my son, despite knowing the truth from the beginning." Daniel turned to him, shocked. "You knew? All this time you knew I wasn't—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Of course I knew," William said, pouring himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. "Your mother and I had been trying for years. Then suddenly she's pregnant after a business trip I took to Tokyo." He took a long swallow. "I'm not a fool, Daniel." "Then why?" Daniel asked. "Why pretend? Why raise me as your son?" William's laugh was hollow. Divorce would have been messy. Eleanor had already signed a prenuptial agreement that would have left her with almost nothing. And I had appearances to maintain. He shrugged. "Besides, I needed an heir." Daniel felt physically ill. All those years of striving for William's approval, of trying to be worthy of the Harrington name, had been based on a lie. So everything, Harvard, Wharton, my position in the company, all of it was just to maintain appearances? "Don't be naive," William said. "You benefited greatly from being a Harrington. Would you have preferred growing up with your actual father, a struggling artist with no prospects? Eleanor made a small sound, like a wounded animal. Daniel turned to her. Who is he? My father. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. His name is Thomas Caldwell. We were together before I met William. He was a painter, talented but unknown. The cliché is almost embarrassing, William commented dryly, refilling his glass. Eleanor ignored him. When my parents introduced me to William, they made it clear what was expected. The Harrington family could save my family's shipping business from bankruptcy. It was a practical arrangement. A marriage of convenience, Daniel said flatly. At first, Eleanor admitted, but I was determined to make it work. I cut off all contact with Thomas. She paused, gathering herself. Then, 7 years into our marriage, I saw him again at a gallery opening in Soho. William was away on business, as usual. Thomas and I... Spare us the romantic details, William interrupted. Eleanor continued as if he hadn't spoken. When I discovered I was pregnant, I was terrified. William and I had been trying unsuccessfully for years. He would know immediately that the child wasn't his. But he didn't divorce you, Daniel said. He didn't throw you out. No, Eleanor said softly. He had other ideas. William set down his glass with deliberate precision. I made your mother a deal. She would never contact this Thomas again. She would be the perfect wife, the perfect mother. In return, I would claim you as my own, give you my name, my legacy. And Thomas? Daniel asked. Did he know about me? Eleanor shook her head, fresh tears falling. William threatened to destroy him if I ever told him. Thomas was just beginning to gain recognition as an artist. William had connections in every gallery in New York, so he never knew he had a son, Daniel said, the realization like a physical blow. He still doesn't know. A fair trade, William said coldly. He took my wife, I took his son. Daniel stared at the man he'd called father his entire life, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. You didn't take me out of any paternal feeling. You took me as revenge. William shrugged, unrepentant. Initially, perhaps, but I raised you, Daniel. I made you who you are. And who exactly is that? Daniel demanded. The son of William Harrington, or the son of Thomas Caldwell? Which parts of me are real and which parts are your creation? Eleanor rose from her chair, moving toward Daniel. You are you, Daniel. You've always been you. He stepped back from her reach. How can I know who I am when everything I've believed about myself is a lie? Not everything, William said. His tone had shifted, becoming almost conciliatory. Your accomplishments are your own. Your position in the company is earned. Is it? Daniel challenged. Or did you place me there to maintain your perfect illusion, your perfectly crafted air? William's expression hardened. Be careful, Daniel. You're a Harrington in name only. That can be changed. Are you threatening me on my wedding day? Daniel laughed incredulously. After I just found out my entire life has been a lie? I'm reminding you of reality, William replied coolly. Your future, your wife's future, depends on the Harrington name and fortune. Don't throw that away in some emotional outburst. Daniel felt a chill. The calculated pragmatism, the cold assessment of leverage. This was the real William Harrington, the man he had tried so hard to emulate. You really don't care about me at all, do you? I've never been anything but an extension of your ego. I gave you everything, William said dismissively. Most men would be grateful. William, please, Eleanor interjected. He's just had a terrible shock. A shock you caused, William retorted. 35 years of keeping this secret, and you choose his wedding day to reveal it. What did you hope to accomplish, Eleanor? Eleanor's face flushed. I couldn't bear to hear you taking credit for him one more time, acting as if his goodness, his decency, the very qualities you lack, somehow came from you. Stop, Daniel said quietly. Then louder, stop, both of you. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. I need to know everything. No more lies. When was Thomas Caldwell last in New York? Is he still alive? Would I've ever met him without knowing who he was? Eleanor hesitated. He left New York years ago. The last I heard, he was living in Santa Fe. The last you heard, Daniel repeated. You've been keeping tabs on him. Her silence was answer enough. Jesus, Daniel muttered. Does anyone in this family tell the truth about anything? A knock at the door interrupted them. James poked his head in, his expression apologetic. Sorry to intrude, but people are starting to leave. Sophia is handling things admirably, but she's asking for Daniel. Daniel nodded. Tell her I'll be right there. When James withdrew, he turned back to his parents. I have to go deal with the mess you've made of my wedding day, but this conversation isn't over. William set down his empty glass. Think carefully about your next steps, Daniel. Emotional decisions rarely lead to optimal outcomes. Is that what you told yourself when you decided to raise another man's child as revenge? Daniel asked bitterly. Without waiting for a response, he left the study, pausing in the hallway to compose himself. How was he supposed to face 300 guests now? How was he supposed to face Sophia? Sophia, his new wife, who had just married into a family built on lies. What would she think? Would she look at him differently, knowing he wasn't really a Harrington? Would she regret her choice? As he re-entered the reception tent, he saw her immediately, gracefully bidding farewell to departing guests, her smile never faltering, despite the obvious tension in the air. She caught sight of him and excused herself, crossing to his side. Daniel, she said softly, taking his hands in hers. Are you all right? He looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of changed feelings, any hint of disappointment or regret. He found only concern. No, he admitted. I'm not all right, but I will be. She squeezed his hands. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. That's what we just promised, remember? For the first time since his mother's outburst, Daniel felt something other than shock and anger. A small, warm flicker of hope. I need to tell you everything, he said. And then I need to find someone. Thomas Caldwell, she asked quietly. Daniel blinked in surprise. How did you... Your mother came to me while you were in the study with your father. With William, she corrected herself. She wanted me to know that none of this was your fault. She told me about Thomas. And you're still here, Daniel said wonderingly. You're not running for the hills. Sophia's smile was sad, but determined. I married you, Daniel. Not your name, not your family's money. You. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. I don't even know who me is anymore. Then we'll find out together, she promised. Starting tomorrow. He nodded, pulling her close. Over her shoulder, he could see Eleanor returning to the tent alone, her face composed once more, though her eyes remained red-rimmed. Of William, there was no sign. Starting tomorrow, Daniel repeated, holding on to his wife as if she were a lifeline in a stormy sea. Tomorrow, he would begin the search for Thomas Caldwell, the man whose blood ran in his veins. Tomorrow, he would begin to discover who Daniel Harrington, or whoever he truly was, might become. The morning after the wedding dawned gray and overcast, the weather matching Daniel's mood as he stood at the window of the honeymoon suite at the Plaza Hotel. Behind him, Sophia slept soundly, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the previous day. They had decided to postpone their planned honeymoon to Bali. Finding Thomas Caldwell had become Daniel's priority, a quest Sophia supported without hesitation. Daniel's phone vibrated on the nightstand. James, checking in. He had been invaluable in the aftermath of Eleanor's revelation, managing the remaining guests, fielding questions with diplomatic vagueness. Family matter, he had told the curious. Nothing to worry about. But there was everything to worry about. From Daniel's perspective, his entire identity had been called into question. The face he saw in the mirror each morning. Had he been searching for traces of William all these years in features that could never reflect him? You're thinking too loud, Sophia murmured from the bed, her voice husky with sleep. Daniel turned to her with a small smile. "Sorry. Didn't mean to wake you." She sat up, dark hair tumbling over her shoulders. "Have you slept at all?" "A little," he lied. In truth, he had spent the night researching Thomas Caldwell, finding frustratingly little online. A few exhibition mentions from the 1990s, a small gallery in Santa Fe that listed him among their artists. Nothing recent. Sophia patted the bed beside her. "Come, talk to me." Daniel sat, taking her hand. "I need to find him, Sophia. I need to know where I come from." "I understand," she said softly. "But I want you to remember something. Wherever you came from, I know who you are. You're the man who spends Thanksgiving serving meals at the shelter downtown. The man who remembers everyone's birthday at the office. The man who stopped our cab in the rain to help an elderly woman with her groceries." Daniel squeezed her hand gratefully. "I just keep thinking about him, Thomas. Did he ever wonder about the possibility of a child? Did he look for my mother? Has he been out there all this time, not knowing I exist?" "There's only one way to find out," Sophia said practically. "We need more information, and there's only one person who has it." Daniel nodded reluctantly. "My mother." "Have you spoken to her since last night?" "She left a voicemail, asking to meet." Daniel had listened to it repeatedly. Eleanor's voice stripped of its usual composure, raw with emotion. "I should call her." "You should," Sophia agreed. "But first, breakfast. Everything looks more manageable on a full stomach." 2 hours later, Daniel sat across from Eleanor in a quiet corner of the hotel's restaurant. She looked diminished somehow, her usual elegant confidence replaced by a wary vulnerability. "William has moved to the apartment in London," she said after ordering tea. "Indefinitely." Daniel wasn't surprised. William Harrington had never been one to face messy emotional situations he couldn't control. "And you?" "I'm staying with my sister in Connecticut for now." Eleanor fidgeted with her wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond that had always seemed more like a trophy than a symbol of love. "Daniel, I know you must hate me." "I don't hate you," he interrupted. "I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm confused, but I don't hate you." Relief flickered across her face. "I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did, staying with William, keeping this secret, I thought I was protecting you. From what? From William's vindictiveness, from growing up without the advantages the Harrington name could provide." She hesitated. "And selfishly, from losing you. If William had divorced me, he would have made sure I never saw you again." Daniel considered this. The William Harrington he knew was certainly capable of such cruelty. "Tell me about Thomas," he said. "Everything. How you met, what he was like, everything you've kept from me." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. "We met at Pratt. I was studying design, and he was in the fine arts program. He was different from anyone I'd ever known. My family was old money, very traditional. Thomas came from nothing, had worked his way through school with scholarships and part-time jobs. He had this incredible passion for life, for art. Despite himself, Daniel was captivated by the warmth in his mother's voice, so different from her usual measured tones. "You loved him." "Very much," she admitted. "We were together for nearly 2 years. We had an apartment in Brooklyn. Tiny, always cold in winter. But we were happy." Her expression clouded. "Then my father's business started failing. The family fortune was dwindling. My parents introduced me to William, who was already successful even in his 20s. "And you left Thomas for William," Daniel said, trying to keep judgment from his voice. Eleanor nodded, ashamed. "My parents made it clear that it was my duty to save the family. William was charming then, ambitious. I convinced myself it was the sensible choice." She looked up at Daniel. "I didn't realize what he was really like until after we were married. By then, it was too late." "But you saw Thomas again, years later?" "Yes, at a gallery in Soho. He had begun to make a name for himself." Eleanor's eyes grew distant with memory. "William was in Japan for 2 weeks. Thomas and I, it was like no time had passed. I told myself it would be just once, for closure. But then you were pregnant, Daniel supplied. Eleanor nodded. When I realized, I was terrified. William and I had been trying unsuccessfully for years. Fertility treatments, specialists. I knew he would immediately realize the child wasn't his. She took a shaky breath. I considered not telling him, just filing for divorce. But then he came home from his trip with a necklace from Tiffany, talking about a new fertility doctor in Switzerland. He seemed hopeful. I couldn't bring myself to tell him, but he figured it out anyway, Daniel said. The timing made it obvious, and then when you were born, she smiled faintly. You looked so much like Thomas. The same eyes, the same mouth. William knew immediately. Daniel felt a strange jolt. All his life, people had commented on how little he resembled either of his parents. Now he understood why. What did he do when he realized? He was cold, calculating. He laid out his terms. I would never see Thomas again, never tell him about the pregnancy. I would be the perfect wife, supporting his career, raising his son to be a proper Harrington. In return, he wouldn't divorce me, wouldn't leave me penniless, and he would give you his name, his advantages. He used me to punish both of you, Daniel said bitterly. Yes, Eleanor admitted, but I think in time he developed genuine feelings for you. In his way. Daniel scoffed. His way being conditional love based on how well I performed, how perfectly I fit into his vision of a Harrington heir. Eleanor couldn't deny it. I tried to balance him, to show you unconditional love. I know I wasn't always successful. The gilded cage William built for us had rules for everything, consequences for stepping out of line. Did you ever try to contact Thomas again, to tell him about me? Eleanor's hesitation told Daniel everything. I wanted to, she finally said. So many times, especially when you were little and would do something that reminded me so much of him, the way you would get lost in drawing for hours, how you noticed beauty in unexpected places. But you didn't. William had investigators watching me for years, and he made it very clear what would happen to Thomas if I reached out. Eleanor's voice hardened. William had connections in the art world. He could have destroyed Thomas's career with a word. So instead, you watched me from a distance, seeing him in me, Daniel realized. That must have been its own kind of torture. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Every day, but also a blessing. You were the best of him, Daniel. His creativity, his compassion, his integrity. You have all of it. Daniel sat back, processing this new understanding of his childhood. All those times his mother had defended his interest in art, had encouraged him to pursue creative outlets. Despite William's focus on business and status, she had been nurturing the parts of him that came from Thomas. I need to find him, Daniel said finally. I need to meet him. Eleanor nodded. I know. That's why I brought this. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a manila envelope. Everything I know about where he might be. The gallery in Santa Fe he was affiliated with. The name of an artist friend who might know his whereabouts. And she hesitated before pulling out a small photograph. This is him, us, from before. Daniel took the photograph with trembling hands. It showed a younger Eleanor laughing, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking at the camera with unguarded joy. Beside her stood a man with unruly dark hair and intense eyes that Daniel recognized from his own mirror. The resemblance was undeniable. When was this taken? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Summer of 1990, in Central Park. Eleanor smiled sadly. We used to spend Sundays there, sketching, people watching. Daniel stared at the photograph, at the man whose blood ran in his veins. Thomas Caldwell looked nothing like William Harrington. Where William was all hard angles and controlled precision, Thomas appeared softer, more open, his smile reaching his eyes in a way William's never did. Why now, Mom? Daniel asked, looking up from the photograph. After all these years of keeping the secret, why reveal it at my wedding? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "I've been seeing a therapist," she finally admitted, "for the past year, working through the damage of my marriage, the weight of the secrets." She twisted her wedding ring. "When William stood up and took credit for who you are, something in me just broke. All those years of his emotional manipulation, of him molding you into his image while I watched the parts of you that were Thomas's light being dimmed, it was too much. I wish you'd chosen a different moment," Daniel said honestly, "but I understand why you couldn't stay silent anymore. I'm so sorry, Daniel, for everything, for not being stronger sooner." Daniel reached across the table and took his mother's hand. "You're being stronger now. That's what matters." He carefully placed the photograph and envelope in his jacket pocket. "I'm going to Santa Fe today, if possible." "I thought you might," Eleanor said. "Your honeymoon." "Sophia understands. She's coming with me." Eleanor looked relieved. "She's a remarkable woman." "Yes, she is," Daniel agreed, thinking of Sophia's unwavering support since the revelation. "Will you be okay with William in London?" "I'll be fine," Eleanor assured him. "Better than I've been in years, actually. The secret is out. Whatever happens next, at least I'm not living a lie anymore." Daniel nodded, understanding completely. "I'll call you when I know more, when I find him." "Daniel," Eleanor said hesitantly as he stood to leave, "Thomas is a good man. Whatever William may have told you about him, whatever you might imagine, he's a good man." "I hope so," Daniel replied. "I hope I'm more his son than William's." Eleanor's smile was sad but genuine. "You are. In all the ways that matter most, you always have been." 3 hours later, Daniel and Sophia were on a private jet bound for Santa Fe, the Harrington family plane, or was it still his to use? The question of his status, his very identity, hung over everything now. "Stop second-guessing yourself," Sophia said, intuiting his thoughts as she often did. "You have every right to use the company resources while you figure this out." Daniel smiled gratefully. "Have I told you today how lucky I am to have married you?" "Only twice," she teased. "You're falling behind schedule." As the plane soared westward, Daniel reviewed the information Eleanor had provided. The gallery, Southwestern Light, still existed according to a quick internet search. The artist friend, Michael Reeves, had a website showcasing his sculpture work with contact information. Most valuable was a note Eleanor had included, mentioning that Thomas had purchased land outside Santa Fe in the early 2000s, intending to build a studio there. "It's a start," Sophia said encouragingly. "Between the gallery and this Michael person, we should be able to track him down." Daniel nodded, but anxiety gnawed at him. "What if he doesn't want to be found? What if he wants nothing to do with me?" Sophia squeezed his hand. "Then at least you'll know." "But Daniel, what father wouldn't want to know his son? A son who appears out of nowhere after 32 years, Daniel pointed out, whose mere existence could stir up painful memories. Or bring unexpected joy, Sophia countered. "You can't predict his reaction. You can only control yours." The flight attendant announced their descent into Santa Fe. Looking out the window, Daniel saw the distinctive landscape of northern New Mexico spread below. Rusty red earth, sage-green vegetation, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising in the distance. Somewhere down there was the man who had unknowingly given him life. "Whatever happens," Daniel said quietly, "thank you for being here." Sophia kissed his cheek. "Always." They landed at Santa Fe Municipal Airport in the early afternoon. The air was dry and warm, so different from the humid heat they'd left behind in New York. A rental car was waiting, and within an hour, they were pulling up outside Southwestern Light Gallery on Canyon Road. The gallery was housed in a traditional adobe building, its entrance flanked by blooming cactus plants. Inside the Southwestern Light Gallery, the space was airy and bright, with high ceilings and carefully positioned skylights that bathed the artwork in natural illumination. Modern paintings and sculptures shared space with traditional Southwestern pieces, creating an eclectic but harmonious collection. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and turquoise jewelry approached them. "Welcome to Southwestern Light. I'm Maria Delgado, the owner. Can I help you find something special today?" Daniel hesitated, suddenly unsure how to explain his presence. Sophia stepped in smoothly. "We're actually hoping you might have information about an artist," she said. "Thomas Caldwell. We understand he's exhibited here." Maria's expression brightened. "Tom? Yes, he's one of our most established artists. His landscapes are extraordinary. They capture the soul of New Mexico like few others can." She gestured toward a wall where several paintings hung. "These are his most recent works." Daniel moved toward the paintings as if in a trance. Each canvas depicted the New Mexico landscape, mesas bathed in sunset light, storm clouds gathering over distant mountains, ancient juniper trees twisting against an azure sky. The technique was masterful, but it was the emotional quality that struck Daniel most forcefully, a sense of longing, of searching that resonated within him. "They're beautiful," he said softly. "Are you collectors?" Maria asked. Daniel turned to face her. "No, He took a deep breath. "I believe Thomas Caldwell is my biological father. I've just found out, and I'm trying to locate him." Maria's eyes widened in surprise. She studied Daniel's face intently, then nodded slowly. "I see it now. The resemblance is remarkable, especially around the eyes." Hope surged through Daniel. "You know him well, then?" "For nearly 20 years. Maria confirmed. "He moved to Santa Fe in the late 90s, started showing with us soon after." She hesitated. "This is quite a revelation." "Does Tom know about you?" "No," Daniel said. "It's a complicated situation. My mother, she was prevented from telling him." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "That explains some things." At Daniel's questioning look, she continued, "Tom has always had a certain melancholy about him. A sense of something unresolved. He's never married, keeps mostly to himself except for a small circle of friends." "Can you tell us where to find him?" Sophia asked gently. Maria hesitated. "Tom values his privacy. He lives about 40 minutes outside town up in the hills. He built a house and studio on some land he bought years ago." She studied Daniel again. "But given the circumstances, do you have something to write with?" Daniel pulled out his phone, poised to take notes. Maria provided directions to Thomas's property, a remote location north of town, accessible by a winding dirt road. "He might not be there," she cautioned. "He sometimes goes on painting trips for weeks at a time." "But it's worth checking. Thank you," Daniel said sincerely. "This means more than I can express." Maria smiled warmly. "I hope you find what you're looking for. And Daniel," she glanced at the paintings, "Tom is a good man, a thoughtful, gentle soul. Whatever happens, know that." Outside, Daniel stood for a moment in the bright New Mexico sunshine, overwhelmed by the reality that he was so close to finding Thomas Caldwell. "She recognized you in me," he said wonderingly to Sophia. "She could see him in my face." Sophia squeezed his hand. "Are you ready for this?" "No," Daniel admitted, "but I need to do it anyway." They followed Maria's directions, leaving the charming streets of Santa Fe behind, heading north into increasingly rural terrain. The paved road eventually gave way to gravel, then dirt. Mountains rose around them, the landscape becoming more dramatic with each mile. "She wasn't kidding about remote," Sophia commented, as they navigated a particularly rough stretch of road. "He really wanted to get away from everything." "Or everyone," Daniel said quietly, anxiety growing as they approached their destination. What if Thomas wanted nothing to do with him? What if this journey ended in rejection? Finally, they rounded a bend and saw it, a modern structure of wood, glass and stone, perched on a hillside with commanding views of the valley below. A separate building, smaller but equally well designed, stood nearby, the studio, Daniel presumed. "This is it," he said, his mouth suddenly dry. "He's made a good life for himself." Sophia parked the car in front of the house. "Do you want me to wait here?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I need you with me." They approached the front door together. Daniel raised his hand to knock, then hesitated, a lifetime of questions and uncertainties flooding through him. Sophia reached up and gently guided his hand to the door. 3 firm knocks. Silence followed. Daniel was about to knock again when he heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door swung open, and there he was, Thomas Caldwell, older than in the photograph, but unmistakably the same man. Silver threaded his still thick dark hair, and lines had formed around his eyes, but the intensity of his gaze remained unchanged. Those eyes, Daniel's eyes, widened in shock as they took in the young man standing before him. "Can I help you?" Thomas asked, his voice deep and slightly rough, as if unused to speaking. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. How did one begin such a conversation? How did you tell a stranger that you were the child they never knew existed? Sophia gently squeezed his hand in silent support. "My name is Daniel Harrington," he finally managed. I believe I'm your son." Thomas gripped the doorframe, his face draining of color. For a long moment he simply stared at Daniel, his expression moving from shock to disbelief to something like dawning recognition. "Eleanor's son," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're Eleanor's son," Daniel nodded. "Yes, and yours." Thomas's eyes filled suddenly with tears. Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Daniel, holding him with a fierce intensity that spoke of 32 years of absence. "I wondered," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "God help me, I wondered." Daniel felt his own tears begin to fall as he returned the embrace of the father he had never known. In that moment, something long broken inside him began to heal, a wound he hadn't even known he carried. Thomas finally pulled back, keeping his hands on Daniel's shoulders, as if afraid he might disappear. "Come in," he said. "Please, come in." The interior of the house was open and airy, with large windows framing the spectacular landscape. Art filled the space. Not just Thomas's own paintings, but sculptures, pottery, textiles, creating an environment of creativity and beauty. Thomas led them to a sitting area overlooking the valley. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be good," Daniel said, his voice still unsteady. As Thomas moved to the kitchen, Sophia squeezed Daniel's hand. "I'll give you some time alone," she whispered. "I'll explore the garden we passed." Daniel nodded gratefully. This first conversation needed to be just between him and Thomas. When Thomas returned with water, his hands were visibly shaking. "Your mother," he said, sitting across from Daniel. "Is she—" She's well," Daniel assured him. "It was her revelation that led me here. She finally told the truth after all these years." Thomas's expression was complex. Relief, sadness, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "I never knew," he said. "I need you to understand that. I never knew about you." "I believe you," Daniel said. "She wanted to tell you. She wasn't allowed to." "William Harrington," Thomas said, the name heavy with old pain. "He found out about us then." Daniel nodded. "He knew I wasn't his from the beginning. He raised me anyway, as part of some complex revenge against both of you." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture Daniel had caught himself making countless times. "That sounds like the William I remember. Calculating, controlling. He always saw people as pieces to be moved on a chessboard." He looked directly at Daniel. "I'm so sorry. If I had known—" "What would you have done?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. Thomas considered the question seriously. "I would have fought for you," he said finally, "for both of you. I had nothing to offer back then, not compared to William's wealth, but I would have found a way." The simple sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to Daniel's eyes. "I believe that too." "Tell me about yourself," Thomas said. "I've missed your entire life. I want to know everything." Daniel began to speak, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. He told Thomas about his childhood, his education, his work at Harrington Developments. He spoke of his love of art that William had always discouraged, of his volunteer work with underprivileged children, of meeting Sophia. Thomas listened intently, occasionally asking questions, but mostly absorbing every detail with evident wonder. "You have my mother's eyes," he said at one point. "She died when you were about 10, I guess. She would have loved to know you." "I would have loved to know her," Daniel replied. The realization that he had lost not just one set of grandparents, but two, people who never even knew he existed, struck him deeply. "And now," Thomas asked carefully, "after learning the truth, what happens now?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "My relationship with William, it's complicated. More so now. I'm still processing what this means for my life, my identity." "Identity isn't just about blood," Thomas said thoughtfully. "It's about choices, values, who you choose to be." He smiled slightly. "Though looking at you is like seeing myself 30 years ago. The resemblance is uncanny." "Maria at the gallery noticed it immediately," Daniel said. Thomas nodded. "She would. She's known me a long time." He hesitated. "Daniel, I want you to know, finding out about you is the most extraordinary gift. Whatever happens next, however you want to proceed, slowly, cautiously, or not at all, that's your choice. But I'm here. I will always be here now." The simple promise, offered without pressure or expectation, touched Daniel deeply. "I'd like to know you," he said, "to make up for lost time, if that's possible." "I'd like that too," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "Very much." They talked for hours, sharing stories, discovering connections, a shared dislike of cilantro, the same unusual way of holding a pencil, a mutual love of Edward Hopper's paintings. Sophia returned eventually, and Thomas welcomed her warmly, thanking her for supporting Daniel through such a momentous discovery. As the sun began to set, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Thomas showed them his studio, a light-filled space where half-finished canvases stood on easels and completed works lined the walls. "This is where I'm happiest," Thomas explained. "Just me and the canvas, trying to capture something true." Daniel moved through the space, absorbing the creative energy, feeling a connection to this man who had given him more than just his features, who had, perhaps, given him his soul. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Thomas asked. "I'm a decent cook, and there's a guest room if you'd like to stay the night." Daniel exchanged glances with Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd like that," he said. "Thank you." As Thomas moved to the kitchen to begin preparing the meal, Daniel stepped outside onto the deck, needing a moment to process everything. The New Mexico sunset spread before him, spectacular in its beauty, so different from the world he had known. Sophia joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," Daniel admitted. "But in a good way. He's everything my mother described. Gentle, thoughtful, authentic in a way William never was." He seems to care about you already," Sophia observed. "Yes." Daniel watched as the light shifted over the distant mountains. "It makes me wonder who I might have been if I'd been raised by him instead of William, how different my life would have been." "You can't change the past," Sophia reminded him gently, "but you can shape the future. You have a chance now to know your father, to build a relationship with him." Daniel nodded, his mind already racing ahead. What would this mean for his position at Harrington Developments, for his relationship with the man who had raised him, however coldly, for his very identity as Daniel Harrington? But those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight was for connection, for beginning to heal a wound that had been opened before he was even born. Tonight was for discovering the first pieces of who he truly was. From inside, Thomas called them to dinner. Daniel took Sophia's hand, ready to take another step on this unexpected journey. "Coming," he called back, his voice steady, despite the emotion welling within him. As they turned to go inside, Daniel caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window glass. And for the first time, he saw not just himself, but the legacy of Thomas Caldwell shining in his eyes. Thomas finally pulled back, keeping his hands on Daniel's shoulders as if afraid he might disappear. "Come in," he said. "Please come in." And the interior of the house was open and airy, with large windows framing the spectacular landscape. Art filled the space, not just Thomas's own paintings, but sculptures, pottery, textiles, creating an environment of creativity and beauty. Thomas led them to a sitting area overlooking the valley. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be good," Daniel said, his voice still unsteady. As Thomas moved to the kitchen, Sophia squeezed Daniel's hand. "I'll give you some time alone," she whispered. "I'll explore the garden we passed." Daniel nodded gratefully. This first conversation needed to be just between him and Thomas. When Thomas returned with water, his hands were visibly shaking. "Your mother," he said, sitting across from Daniel. "Is she—" "She's well," Daniel assured him. "It was her revelation that led me here. She finally told the truth after all these years." Thomas's expression was complex. Relief, sadness, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "I never knew," he said. "I need you to understand that. I never knew about you." "I believe you," Daniel said. "She wanted to tell you. She wasn't allowed to." "William Harrington," Thomas said, the name heavy with old pain. "He found out about us then." Daniel nodded. "He knew I wasn't his from the beginning. He raised me anyway as part of some complex revenge against both of you." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture Daniel had caught himself making countless times. "That sounds like the William I remember. Calculating, controlling. He always saw people as pieces to be moved on a chessboard." He looked directly at Daniel. "I'm so sorry. If I had known—" "What would you have done?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. Thomas considered the question seriously. "I would have fought for you," he said finally. "For both of you. I had nothing to offer back then, not compared to William's wealth, but I would have found a way." The simple sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to Daniel's eyes. "I believe that too. Tell me about yourself," Thomas said. "I've missed your entire life. I want to know everything." Daniel began to speak, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. He told Thomas about his childhood, his education, his work at Harrington Developments. He spoke of his love of art that William had always discouraged, of his volunteer work with underprivileged children, of meeting Sophia. Thomas listened intently, occasionally asking questions, but mostly absorbing every detail with evident wonder. "You have my mother's eyes," he said at one point. "She died when you were about 10, I guess. She would have loved to know you." "I would have loved to know her," Daniel replied. The realization that he had lost not just one set of grandparents, but two, people who never even knew he existed, struck him deeply. "And now?" Thomas asked carefully. "After learning the truth, what happens now?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "My relationship with William, it's complicated, more so now. I'm still processing what this means for my life, my identity." "Identity isn't just about blood," Thomas said thoughtfully. "It's about choices, values, who you choose to be." He smiled slightly. "Though looking at you is like seeing myself 30 years ago. The resemblance is uncanny." "Maria at the gallery noticed it immediately," Daniel said. Thomas nodded. "She would. She's known me a long time." He hesitated. "Daniel, I want you to know, finding out about you is the most extraordinary gift. Whatever happens next, however you want to proceed, slowly, cautiously, or not at all, that's your choice. But I'm here. I will always be here now." The simple promise, offered without pressure or expectation, touched Daniel deeply. "I'd like to know you," he said, "to make up for lost time, if that's possible." "I'd like that too," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. Very much. They talked for hours, sharing stories, discovering connections, a shared dislike of cilantro, the same unusual way of holding a pencil, a mutual love of Edward Hopper's paintings. Sophia returned eventually, and Thomas welcomed her warmly, thanking her for supporting Daniel through such a momentous discovery. As the sun began to set, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Thomas showed them his studio, a light-filled space where half-finished canvases stood on easels and completed works lined the walls. "This is where I'm happiest," Thomas explained. "Just me and the canvas, trying to capture something true." Daniel moved through the space, absorbing the creative energy, feeling a connection to this man who had given him more than just his features, who had perhaps given him his soul. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Thomas asked. "I'm a decent cook, and there's a guest room if you'd like to stay the night." Daniel exchanged glances with Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd like that," he said. "Thank you." As Thomas moved to the kitchen to begin preparing the meal, Daniel stepped outside onto the deck, needing a moment to process everything. The New Mexico sunset spread before him, spectacular in its beauty, so different from the world he had known. Sophia joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," Daniel admitted. "But in a good way. He's everything my mother described. Gentle, thoughtful, authentic in a way William never was." He seems to care about you already," Sophia observed. "Yes." Daniel watched as the light shifted over the distant mountains. "It makes me wonder who I might have been if I'd been raised by him instead of William, how different my life would have been." "You can't change the past," Sophia reminded him gently, "but you can shape the future. You have a chance now to know your father, to build a relationship with him." Daniel nodded, his mind already racing ahead. What would this mean for his position at Harrington Developments, for his relationship with the man who had raised him, however coldly, for his very identity as Daniel Harrington? But those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight was for connection, for beginning to heal a wound that had been opened before he was even born. Tonight was for discovering the first pieces of who he truly was. From inside, Thomas called them to dinner. Daniel took Sophia's hand, ready to take another step on this unexpected journey. "Coming," he called back, his voice steady despite the emotion welling within him. As they turned to go inside, Daniel caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window glass. And for the first time, he saw not just himself, but the legacy of Thomas Caldwell shining in his eyes. Chapter 4. Reconciliation. 3 months after the wedding that had shattered his understanding of himself, Daniel stood in his office at Harrington Developments, boxing up personal items. The Manhattan skyline spread before him through floor-to-ceiling windows, a view he had once coveted, now just a backdrop to the more important transitions in his life. A knock at the door interrupted his packing. James entered, looking concerned. "So you're really doing this?" Daniel nodded, carefully wrapping a crystal paperweight, a gift from Eleanor on his first day as Vice President of Operations. "It's time." "William is going to lose his mind," James warned. "The board meeting is tomorrow. He's flying in from London specifically to counter your proposal." "Let him," Daniel replied, with a calmness that would have been impossible 3 months ago. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." James shook his head in wonder. "Finding your real father has changed you. Finding myself has changed me," Daniel corrected, though he smiled at the mention of Thomas. The past 3 months had seen multiple trips to Santa Fe, long conversations, a gradual building of a relationship that felt more authentic than anything he'd experienced with William. Thomas had even visited New York the previous month, meeting Eleanor for the first time in decades, an emotional reunion that had brought healing to old wounds. "How's Sophia handling all this?" James asked, helping Daniel pack books into a box. "She's been my rock," Daniel said simply. "Couldn't have done any of this without her." "And the name change?" Daniel paused, his hand resting on the nameplate on his desk. Daniel Harrington, VP Operations. It's complicated. Legally, I'm still a Harrington, but I've started using Caldwell informally. Maybe someday I'll make it official. The door opened again, and Sophia entered, elegant in a tailored suit, her expression worried. "William's here," she said without preamble. "He's demanding to see you, now." Daniel exchanged glances with James. "That's a day earlier than expected." "He heard about your resignation letter," Sophia explained. "He's in the conference room with the executive team." Daniel took a deep breath, centering himself. The confrontation he'd been anticipating for months had arrived. "Well, let's not keep him waiting." James squeezed his shoulder. "Want me to come along?" "No," Daniel said firmly. "This is between William and me, but thank you." Sophia took his hand as they walked through the corridors of Harrington Developments. Staff members watched curiously. Rumors had been circulating for weeks about the rift between Daniel and his father, though few knew the full truth. At the conference room door, Daniel paused. "Ready?" he asked Sophia. "Always," she replied, straightening his tie in a gesture of support. They entered together. William Harrington stood at the head of the long table, commanding attention as he always had. At 65, he remained imposing, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, his eyes sharp and calculating. The executives seated around the table looked uncomfortable, caught in a family drama none of them wished to witness. William's gaze fixed on Daniel, his expression hardening. "So, the prodigal son returns." "I never left, William," Daniel replied evenly. "You did. 3 months in London without so much as a phone call." William waved dismissively at the executives. "Give us the room." They departed quickly, relief evident on their faces. Only Sophia remained at Daniel's side. "Her too," William said coldly. "My wife stays," Daniel stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. William's jaw tightened, but he didn't press the point. Once the door closed behind the last executive, he spoke. "A resignation letter. After everything I've given you, everything I've built for you." "You built nothing for me," Daniel replied. "You built it for yourself, for your ego. I was just a pawn in your game." "Is that what your mother has been telling you? What that painter has been filling your head with?" William's voice dripped with disdain. 3 months of knowing him, and suddenly you're throwing away 32 years of advantages I provided. "I'm not throwing away anything," Daniel said calmly. "I'm choosing a different path. My path." William scoffed. "And what path is that? Following in your biological father's footsteps, becoming a starving artist?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm starting a foundation, the Caldwell Harrington Foundation for Arts Education, providing opportunities for underprivileged children to experience and create art." William stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You're using Harrington money to honor him?" "It's not just Harrington money," Daniel corrected. "It's my inheritance from my maternal grandparents, my own savings, and yes, some Harrington stock that legally belongs to me. Thomas is contributing his time and expertise, not his money, though he offered." William began to pace, his controlled facade cracking. "This is absurd. You're throwing away a career, a legacy." "A legacy built on lies," Daniel interrupted, "on manipulation and control. That's not what I want anymore." "And what about the company? Your responsibilities here?" "I've trained my replacement. Sarah Chen is more than capable of taking over operations." "Without board approval?" William demanded. "The board approved it last week," Daniel said mildly. "You would have known that if you'd been here instead of hiding in London." William's face flushed with anger. "I wasn't hiding. I was giving you time to come to your senses." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You were avoiding the mess you created, just like you've avoided every emotional complexity in your life, including your marriage." "Don't speak to me about my marriage," William said dangerously. "Your mother made her choice 35 years ago." "Under duress," Sophia interjected quietly. "Under threat." William's cold gaze shifted to her. "You know nothing about it." I know everything about it, Sophia replied evenly. I know how you used Daniel as a weapon against both Eleanor and Thomas. How you raised him not out of love, but out of spite. Careful, young lady, William warned. You married into the Harrington family. Your future depends on maintaining those connections. Daniel stepped forward, protective anger flaring. Are you threatening my wife? I'm stating facts, William said coldly. The judge's daughter who married well. How will Judge Mitchell feel when his daughter is suddenly cut off from the Harrington fortune, when the ambitious son-in-law he boasted about becomes a charity worker? My father will be proud of Daniel for standing by his principles, Sophia said, her voice steady despite the obvious threat. Unlike some fathers in this room, the barb hit its mark. William's composure slipped further. You ungrateful... Stop, Daniel interrupted. This ends now, William. The manipulation, the threats, the control, it's over. William stared at him, reassessing. When he spoke again, his voice had regained its calculated reasonableness. Daniel, be sensible. You're upset. I understand that. Finding out about your biological parentage was a shock, but throwing away everything we've built, everything you could still achieve here. I'm not throwing away anything valuable, Daniel said. I'm choosing what matters to me. For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice that isn't about meeting your expectations or earning your approval. And what about your responsibilities to the shareholders, to the 3,000 employees who depend on this company? Don't pretend this is about them, Daniel said wearily. It's about your ego, your need for control. The company will survive without me. It might even thrive under leadership that values more than just the bottom line. William's facade finally cracked completely. After everything I did for you, he shouted, slamming his fist on the conference table. I gave you my name, my connections, my legacy. You used me, Daniel corrected quietly. You used me to punish my mother for loving someone else. You used me to punish Thomas for being the kind of man you could never be. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to remake me in your image. I made you successful. You made me miserable, Daniel replied, the simple truth of it resonating in the quiet room. Every achievement, every milestone, none of it was ever enough. I spent my entire life trying to earn the love that should have been freely given. William turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the city below. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled once more, but with an undercurrent of genuine emotion Daniel had rarely heard from him. I did love you, William said, in my way. I know, Daniel acknowledged, but your way was conditional, based on how well I performed, how perfectly I fit your vision of a Harrington heir. William didn't deny it. And this new path of yours, is that what you truly want? Or is it rebellion, trying to punish me the way you believe I punished your mother and him? The question gave Daniel pause. He had examined his motivations carefully over the past months, with Sophia's help, with Thomas's insight, even with the assistance of a therapist Eleanor had recommended. It's what I want, he said with quiet certainty. I've spent 3 months soul-searching, William. This isn't about you or Thomas or even my mother. It's about who I am, who I want to be. William turned back to face him, his expression unreadable. And who is that exactly? Daniel Harrington, Daniel Caldwell? Who are you choosing to be? Just Daniel, he replied simply. A man trying to do some good in the world. A man who values authenticity over appearances, compassion over control, love over power. He paused. All the things you taught me not to value. William flinched slightly at that. For a moment, something like regret flickered across his features. And there's nothing I can say to change your mind. No compromise to be reached. I'm not leaving the board, Daniel clarified. I'll maintain my ownership stake, but my day-to-day involvement with Harrington Developments is over. William nodded slowly, processing this. And Eleanor? Where does she stand in all this? She's finding her own path, Daniel said. She's filed for divorce, as you probably know. She's reconnecting with her design background, thinking about teaching. And with him, with Caldwell. Daniel hesitated. They're reconciling, finding closure at least. What happens beyond that is their choice. William's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more on the subject. After a long silence, he straightened his already perfect tie, a gesture Daniel recognized as his preparation for concluding a negotiation. Very well, William said formally. I can see your mind is made up. The board meeting tomorrow will proceed as scheduled, Daniel finished. I'll present my resignation officially, introduce Sarah as my replacement, and outline my continued involvement as a board member. William nodded stiffly. I suppose that will have to suffice. He moved toward the door, then paused. One question, Daniel. Are you happy? Truly? The question surprised Daniel with its apparent sincerity. Yes, he answered honestly. For perhaps the first time in my life, I am. Something complicated passed across William's face. Regret, resignation, perhaps even a flicker of respect. Then, I suppose I've failed completely, or succeeded in ways you never intended, Daniel suggested quietly. William considered this, then gave a short, humorless laugh. Always the optimist. That never came from me. He reached for the door handle. Goodbye, Daniel. Goodbye, William. After he left, Sophia moved to Daniel's side. Are you okay? Better than I expected, Daniel admitted. That's probably the most honest conversation we've ever had. Do you think he'll accept your decision? Truly accept it? Daniel shook his head. No. He'll keep trying to control, to manipulate. But his power over me is gone. He turned to her with a smile. Thanks to you, to Thomas, to finally knowing the truth. And to your own courage, Sophia added, kissing him softly. Daniel's phone chimed with a message. Thomas and my mother are waiting at the restaurant, he said, checking the screen. We should go. They left Harrington Developments together, stepping into the bright September sunshine. The foundation offices were already being prepared in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, a space filled with light, with potential, with possibilities Daniel was only beginning to imagine. As they hailed a taxi, Daniel caught a glimpse of his reflection in a storefront window. For a moment, he saw echoes of both men who had shaped his life, William's determination in the set of his jaw, Thomas's compassion in his eyes. But mostly he saw himself, Daniel, neither fully Harrington nor fully Caldwell, but something unique, something true. What are you thinking about? Sophia asked as they settled into the taxi. Daniel smiled, taking her hand. About the future, about second chances. He glanced back at the Harrington building receding behind them. About how sometimes the most painful revelations can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. The taxi pulled into traffic, carrying them toward the restaurant where Thomas and Eleanor waited. Toward the new family they were carefully, cautiously building from the wreckage of secrets and lies. There would be challenges ahead, complexities to navigate, wounds still healing. But for the first time, Daniel was facing the future without the weight of false expectations, without the burden of an identity built on deception. He was simply himself, a man discovering day by day what that truly meant. Second chances, Sophia repeated thoughtfully, for your mother and Thomas. For you, even for William maybe, Daniel said, if he can ever see beyond his own pride. Do you think that's possible? Daniel considered the question seriously. I don't know, but I hope so. Not for my sake, but for his. It must be lonely living as he does. Sophia squeezed his hand. You have your father's compassion, Thomas's compassion, and my mother's resilience, Daniel added. And something that's just me, something I'm still discovering. The taxi turned onto a tree-lined street in the West Village, approaching the small Italian restaurant where their new beginning had started 3 months earlier, the first dinner with Thomas and Eleanor together, awkward and emotional and healing all at once. As they pulled up to the curb, Daniel could see them through the window, Thomas and Eleanor sitting close, talking animatedly. A lifetime of separation between them, yet somehow finding their way back to a connection that had never fully died. "Ready?" Sophia asked as the taxi stopped. Daniel nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him his entire life. "Ready." Together, they stepped out into the sunlight, toward the truth, toward family, toward home. If you enjoyed He's Not the Father, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. I'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from? Share in the comments below. Stay tuned for more compelling family dramas, shocking revelations, and heartfelt reconciliations in our upcoming videos. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story.